The office lobby buzzed with designer heels clicking on marble floors and perfume clouds trailing behind sleek silhouettes. Still, when Mia stepped out of the elevator, her confident smirk disappeared the moment her eyes landed on him. He stood awkwardly at the reception desk, wearing a faded, ill-fitted brown suit that looked like it had lived through a decade of rejection. His shoes were scuffed, his tie wrinkled, and his briefcase was the kind sold at second-hand thrift stores. She almost choked on her caramel latte as she leaned toward her friend and whispered, "You wore that to a job interview?" Loud enough for him to hear, and people turned to look. A few giggled. Her laughter echoed. But he didn't flinch. He just gave a half smile, nodded at the receptionist, and walked silently toward the conference room. Mia rolled her eyes. "Why do people like that even bother?" she muttered, sipping her latte. The truth was, she was having a rough morning too. Her Uber canceled twice, her heel broke on the way in, and she spilled foundation on her blouse. But mocking someone felt refreshing. It was the only way she felt powerful lately, because underneath her perfectly curated Instagram life and glittery resume, she was just a girl trying not to fall apart from the pressure of survival in a world that judged you by your worth, or at least your wardrobe. The interview was for a competitive corporate trainee program, 6 people out of over 300 applicants. And Mia, the confident, overqualified, fashion-obsessed graduate, believed this was her ticket to the life she always dreamed of. She didn't just want success, she needed it. Rent was overdue. Her mother's hospital bills were piling up. And she couldn't go back to being a waitress with a business degree she hadn't paid off yet. So yeah, she was ruthless. She judged. She competed. And if someone showed up looking like a mailman from 1995, she wasn't going to sugarcoat her reaction. After all, wasn't the corporate world survival of the sharpest? But what she didn't know was that the man in the cheap suit, David, wasn't there for a job interview. He didn't come looking for approval. He came looking for answers. Because this wasn't just another day for him. He had walked into the company he had quietly built from the shadows, wearing the very suit his late father wore to every job he was rejected from. A silent tribute. A personal reminder of where he came from. And today, for the first time, he was going to walk among his employees, not as a billionaire in a sleek car, but as a nobody. An experiment to see the real culture that his people had built. He wanted to meet the applicants, feel the energy, and see the ambition. But instead, he saw something else. He saw a girl who mocked, laughed, and humiliated with no remorse. And even though she barely spared him a second glance after that moment, he remembered everything. The tilt of her head, the arrogance in her tone, the fake pity in her voice. He could have walked away and forgotten her like hundreds before. But something about Mia intrigued him. Maybe it was how she clutched her phone too tightly. Maybe it was the way her smile faded when no one was looking. Maybe it was the pain behind her eyes that he knew too well. Because once upon a time, he too was mocked for being poor, laughed at for dreaming big, looked down upon for dressing cheaply. And now, the tables had turned. But David didn't plan revenge, not yet. He wanted to understand. Who was she? Why did someone so beautiful sound so bitter? He watched from a distance as she breezed through her interview with confident charm, throwing business terms like darts, her resume shining with internships and fake smiles. She was polished, perfect, but hollow. And he wondered, what happens when a world that's built on appearances collides with someone who stopped caring about being seen? That day, Mia didn't know she'd just laughed at the man who owned the company. She didn't know her words would haunt her. Her face would be remembered. Or that the man she dismissed would soon become her boss. All she knew was that the cheap suit made her feel better about herself for 5 minutes. But sometimes, 5 minutes can change your life forever. Especially when the person you mocked is about to become the storm that shakes your world to its core. Long before the laughter in the lobby and the cheap suit that drew scornful eyes, David lived in a world where dreams were currency and survival was a daily negotiation with fate. He was born in a cramped apartment above a struggling hardware store in the outskirts of Detroit, where the winters bit through the cracks in the windows, and summer meant fans instead of air conditioning. His father, Alan, was a man of calloused hands and quiet hope, who worked 12-hour shifts fixing broken plumbing for neighbors who often couldn't pay. His mother, Grace, worked 2 part-time jobs and still made it home in time to read bedtime stories by flashlight when the power was cut. They didn't have much, but they had love. And in David's world, that was his first fortune. He remembered nights eating ramen noodles while his parents whispered about overdue bills. He remembered sleeping in the back of the store when the rent was too much. He remembered the embarrassment of hand-me-down shoes and showing up to school with a backpack stitched together with hope. But he also remembered his father's words. "Your worth isn't measured by what you wear, son. It's what you do when no one's watching." Those words became his fuel. He didn't chase fame. He chased freedom. At 13, David started fixing broken electronics from garage sales, selling refurbished radios online for a few bucks. By 16, he'd coded his first website. By 18, he turned a side hustle into a startup. While his friends were partying, David was debugging code under street lamps because the store's power was out again. And when he finally sold his first company for 6 figures, he didn't buy a car. He paid off his parents' mortgage. From there, it snowballed. Investment after investment, business after business. He kept a low profile, never showed his face publicly, never boasted. He operated in shadows, watching the world through the lens of someone who never forgot where he came from. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Mia's life was painted in filters and curated captions. Her world was the opposite of David's. Raised by a former model mother and a stepfather who believed appearance was everything, Mia grew up in luxury, but not love. Her home had chandeliers, but lacked warmth. Birthdays were Instagram events, not heartfelt gatherings. Affection was replaced by expectations. Her mother drilled into her the importance of beauty, of looking the part, of being the it girl in every room. At first, Mia loved the glamour, the shopping trips, the beauty pageants, the attention. But as she got older, the compliments started feeling hollow. Her self-worth became tied to how many likes her selfie got. Her stepfather never failed to point out when she gained a few pounds, and her mother cared more about Botox appointments than bedtime stories. School was just a stage, not a place to learn. Her dreams? They were never really hers. She was told what to want. A rich husband, a glamorous life, a name in a magazine. But deep inside, under the contour and lipstick, Mia craved authenticity. She wanted to be more than a pretty face. Yet every time she tried to break the mold, take a serious class, apply for a job without using her looks, she was mocked. "Why would you want to work when you can marry rich?" her friends would say. "You're too pretty to stress yourself." And slowly, she began to believe it. That her value was in her beauty, not her brain. That love was transactional. That people were tools, not partners. When her mother's business went bankrupt, Mia's glamorous world began to crumble. They sold the mansion, moved into a smaller condo, and the designer gifts stopped. Suddenly, the girl who had it all was forced to fend for herself. And that's when she realized how little she truly had. No real skills, no savings. Just a collection of expensive shoes and fragile self-worth. That's why the job interview mattered so much. It wasn't just a shot at a paycheck. It was her last chance to prove she was more than a body in a designer dress. She studied late into the night, wore her best outfit, and convinced herself she could make it in a world that never trained her for anything real. But when she saw David in his old suit, he became everything she was afraid of becoming. Poor, outdated, irrelevant. And so, she laughed. Not because she was cruel, but because she was scared. Scared that one day, her face would fade, her money would run out, and she'd be just another person trying to matter in a world that rewards surface over soul. She mocked what she feared. And David, he recognized that fear, because he'd lived it. And he also knew what it meant to rise above it. What neither of them knew was how their opposite worlds were about to collide. Not in boardrooms, but in broken hearts. Not through resumes, but through revelations. One had fought for everything. The other had been handed everything and still felt empty. Their connection wouldn't be built on shared goals, but on hidden wounds. And the more they'd try to fight it, the more fate would entangle their stories, until neither could escape what was meant to be. Because sometimes, the richest man hides behind the poorest suit. And sometimes, the most glamorous woman is the loneliest girl in the room. This wasn't just a love story. It was a war between ego and empathy, class and character, past and present. And the battle had only just begun. The tension in the room was palpable. The large corporate boardroom gleamed with polished wood floors, crystal chandeliers hanging above, and towering windows offering a view of the city's skyline. It was the kind of place where polished shoes and tailored suits were the standard uniform. Mia stood at the entrance, her heels clicking on the floor, a confident smile plastered on her face. She had spent hours getting ready, every detail perfect, every accessory chosen with care, hoping to leave an impression. She had spent the last few years trying to overcome the limitations of her superficial past. This job interview was her shot at independence, at proving she wasn't just a pretty face, and she was determined not to let anything stand in her way. But then David entered the room, in a suit that looked like it had seen better days. It wasn't even a cheap suit. It was just old. The wrinkles in the fabric and the frayed edges of the cuffs told stories of a man who didn't care much about appearances. A man who had made it on his own, without the need to flaunt wealth. His shirt sleeves weren't rolled up in some sleek, intentional fashion. They were simply too long, hidden beneath his sleeves. The tie was crooked. His shoes had seen better days. Mia, despite all her confidence, couldn't stop herself from looking at him with judgment. Who would wear that to a job interview? The thought crossed her mind before she could even suppress it. The realization was sharp and embarrassing. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't how things worked in her world. And yet, here he was, looking perfectly comfortable in his disheveled suit, as if he didn't care about the expectations around him. Meanwhile, she was dressed in a tailored designer dress, carefully styled hair, and a look that screamed wealth, sophistication, and perfection. And somehow, the man who looked like he belonged on a construction site, or at the very least, a discount store, was the one who would challenge her on everything. The contrast between them was jarring. She was playing the part of a high-powered career woman, while he seemed to have no interest in pretending. They stood in stark opposition to one another, each unaware of the larger battle that was unfolding. To her, the suit was a sign of someone who had no taste, no ambition, no awareness of what it meant to be respected in this world. To him, her polished exterior was a mask that concealed the fragility of a woman who had spent her whole life depending on things she couldn't control: appearance, status, and the ever-looming expectations of others. David was used to judgment. The wealthy had never accepted him because he didn't fit their mold. They looked down on his humble beginnings, on the old sneakers he wore to meetings, on the cheap suits he bought from second-hand stores. They saw him as an outsider, not worthy of being in the same room. Mia, too, had her struggles, just in a different form. She had grown up with everything handed to her, but everything came with strings attached. The beauty, the wealth, the designer labels. Those were the things that defined her in her mother's eyes, not her intelligence, not her heart. The higher the heels she wore, the more distant her dreams felt from reality. It was like she had been living on a stage, and the script never allowed her to be anything other than perfect. When Mia first looked at David, her instinct was to dismiss him. How could he possibly understand what she was striving for? How could someone who didn't have money, didn't have a reputation, possibly offer anything that could help her? He was a joke, a cheap suit in a room full of luxury. But as the conversation started, she noticed something different. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't using his wealth or status to control the room. He didn't need to. His words were sharp, insightful, and challenging. He didn't speak of a fancy college degree or name-drop some influential connection. He spoke with a quiet confidence born from real experience. He wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't, and that authenticity was what truly struck her. Meanwhile, Mia couldn't hide the feeling of being out of place. Her polished exterior cracked as she realized something. For all her beauty, for all her designer dresses and luxurious life, she had never really had to fight for anything. She had been handed opportunities that were defined by her looks, by her ability to smile prettily and say the right things. But David, he'd fought for every inch. His success wasn't based on a carefully crafted persona. It was based on hard work, on earning every moment of recognition. Her value had always been tied to how much she had or how well she could present herself. But David's value was tied to what he had done, not who he knew or what he looked like. And that realization was like a slap in the face. Her instincts screamed that she needed to be perfect, to remain in control. But the more she looked at David, the more she saw how hollow that need for control was. He had the kind of power that didn't need to scream. He was the storm beneath the calm exterior. And that's when she started to understand that what truly mattered wasn't the price of the suit or the brand name on her dress. It was the heart beneath it all. The power of someone who could walk into a room, looking like they didn't care, and own it because they knew who they were. The conflict wasn't just about a cheap suit against a branded dress. It was about the way the world viewed them. She saw him as someone who didn't belong. He saw her as someone who was desperately trying to fit into a world that only cared about the surface. Both of them were struggling against expectations, his from the elite, hers from her family and society. But when David spoke, something shifted. The cheap suit didn't matter anymore. His words, the fire in his eyes, the story behind the humble jacket, those were the things that mattered. And Mia couldn't deny it. The suit may have been cheap, but his soul was rich. The conflict between them had only just begun, and this was just the beginning of something neither of them was ready for. The room fell silent when Mia spoke. She had spent the last few minutes pretending to listen, nodding along to David's words, but her mind had been elsewhere. She couldn't shake the image of his cheap suit, so out of place in a world that judged success by appearances, by the glossy sheen of luxury. It wasn't intentional, but she couldn't help herself. The words came out before she could stop them. "So, you think you'll be taken seriously like that?" she said, her voice laced with a tinge of mockery. "You might want to invest in a new wardrobe if you want people to believe you have the credentials to match your ideas." Her laughter wasn't loud, but it was cutting, almost imperceptible in its cruelty. And then, there it was, the awkward silence. A few people in the room shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting from Mia to David, unsure how to react. David's face remained impassive, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem to take the jab personally. But that only made Mia feel even more self-conscious. She had expected him to rise to the occasion, to defend himself, to argue his worth in a world that valued material success over character. Instead, he simply smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. And then, without a word, David stood up. It was a subtle movement, no dramatic flair, no show of emotion, but it sent a ripple of surprise through the room. He picked up his jacket, adjusted the sleeves one last time, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Mia stood there for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. It was almost as if the air had been sucked out of the room. She had expected him to be angry, to confront her. But instead, he had left without a single word of protest. It was that calm, quiet departure that unsettled her. For a moment, she couldn't even process what had just occurred. She had mocked him, yes, but she hadn't expected him to simply walk away. Her mind raced with thoughts. Had he been embarrassed? Was he angry? Did he feel defeated? But there was something else she couldn't shake. A feeling that she had miscalculated, that the power dynamics in the room had shifted in a way she couldn't quite understand. Mia's instinct was to stand firm in her judgment. She had come from a world where wealth and appearance were everything. She had always been able to walk into a room and command attention, to make people see her as successful because of her clothes, her looks, her image. But David's departure had revealed something she wasn't prepared for. He didn't care about any of that. It wasn't about the suit or the shoes or the brand name. It was about something deeper, something Mia hadn't yet understood. And now she was left with the uncomfortable realization that she had been wrong, that she had underestimated him in a way that could cost her more than she had anticipated. The whole situation left Mia feeling a bit shaken. She had assumed that by mocking him, she would reinforce the divide between them, that she could prove she was right, that she was the one who truly belonged in this world. But David had proven her wrong, not through words, but through action. He didn't need to engage in petty arguments or defend himself. He simply walked away. He left her with her pride and her arrogance. And in that moment, Mia realized just how small those things truly were. She had thought she was in control, that her world was the only one that mattered. But David's quiet exit had shattered that illusion. He wasn't the one who needed to prove himself. He already had. And now, Mia had to face the consequences of her own arrogance. As the room slowly came back to life, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that the tables had turned. She had dismissed him, but he had walked away with his dignity intact. And now, for the first time, Mia was unsure of who was in control. The suit that had seemed so ridiculous only moments ago now seemed like a symbol of something more. A symbol of David's quiet strength, of the kind of man who didn't need to shout his worth from the rooftops, who didn't need to conform to anyone's expectations. And she, the woman who had always been defined by her appearance, was left wondering if she had lost more than just a job opportunity. She had lost the chance to truly understand what mattered. In that moment, she realized that her world, her carefully constructed world of appearances, wealth, and expectations, was far more fragile than she had ever imagined. And David? He was the one who had walked away with something more valuable than all of her wealth combined: his sense of self. As she sat there, processing everything that had just happened, Mia felt a deep unease. The world she had once felt so certain about now seemed like a house of cards, ready to collapse. The question lingered in her mind. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? Mia was not used to being in a position of uncertainty, especially not when it came to her career. She had always relied on her looks, her connections, and her charm to climb the ladder of success. But after her humiliating interaction with David, something inside her shifted. She couldn't shake the feeling that, in the world they had been playing in, there was something more to success than what she had always believed. For the first time, Mia was forced to confront her limitations, her reliance on appearances, and her shallow understanding of power. She had always considered herself at the top of her game, but now, with David's silent exit, she felt like a novice. She had underestimated him in a way she couldn't quite explain. David, on the other hand, had been busy building something monumental while Mia had been caught up in her world of status and surface-level success. Since his departure from the meeting, he had gone back to work, immersing himself deeper into his projects, refining the ideas that would propel him toward even greater success. He wasn't concerned with validation from anyone. His focus was sharp, unwavering, and the results were undeniable. He was building an empire, slowly, quietly, and with unwavering dedication. While Mia was caught up in climbing her corporate ladder, where social games and appearances often mattered more than substance, David was creating a legacy that would outlast anything she could ever achieve by simply dressing well or playing the part. He had become a man of quiet power, a figure who didn't need to prove his worth, a man who was willing to let his work do the talking. As the weeks passed, Mia's world began to shift in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself working harder, pushing her boundaries, trying to prove that she could be more than just the woman in the expensive suit. But the climb wasn't as easy as she thought it would be. She had to fight for respect. She had to hustle in ways that had never been required of her before. She was faced with challenges she wasn't used to, challenges that tested her patience, her resolve, and her sense of identity. She started to realize that success in the world she had been a part of wasn't just about who you knew or what you wore. It was about what you could build, what you could achieve. The realization hit Mia hard. The validation she had once sought from others, through her appearance, her social connections, her ability to manipulate situations, wasn't enough anymore. She had to create something of value. She had to climb in a way that felt real, not fake. But as Mia worked her way up, something inside her grew restless. She started to wonder if her pursuit of success was really what she wanted. Was she truly climbing the ladder? Or was she just playing the same game she had always played? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that her previous ambitions had been driven by insecurity, by a need to prove she was worthy. But David? David had built his empire not to prove anything to anyone, but because he was passionate about creating something that mattered. While Mia fought for attention and recognition, David was simply moving forward, letting his work speak for itself. This realization began to gnaw at her, driving her to reflect on her motives. She had always thought that success meant having the most, being the best dressed, and attending the most exclusive events. But now, she realized that there was another type of success. Success, the kind that wasn't about appearances or status. It was about building something from the ground up, something that left a lasting impact. And that was exactly what David was doing. As Mia continued to climb her corporate ladder, she started to notice the cracks in the facade she had been living. She had spent so much time and energy chasing after a version of success that was fleeting, superficial. She hadn't realized it, but David's silent departure had forced her to face the uncomfortable truth about herself. She had been so focused on winning the game that she hadn't even understood what it meant to truly succeed. But now, as she saw David's name increasingly in the news, his company gaining global recognition, she understood. His empire was a product of years of dedication, hard work, and most importantly, a refusal to play by the same rules that everyone else did. David was a man who wasn't afraid to fail, a man who wasn't worried about the opinions of others, a man who knew that true power came from the ability to stay true to yourself and your purpose, no matter the odds. And in that, Mia saw something she had always wanted, but never truly understood: a sense of purpose, of meaning beyond the superficial. While Mia climbed the ladder in a world where status and appearances dictated success, David was creating something real, something lasting. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she realized that no amount of money, no amount of social status, could ever replace the satisfaction of knowing that you were building something that mattered. The lesson was clear. While Mia was still playing the game, David had already won. And now, Mia found herself at a crossroads, caught between continuing to climb the corporate ladder and chasing a success that felt hollow, or finding a new way to build something meaningful for herself. In that moment, she understood that the true power wasn't in climbing the ladder. It was in choosing what kind of legacy you wanted to leave behind. And for the first time, Mia wondered if it was time to stop climbing and start building. Mia walked into the office building with a sense of anticipation, unsure of what to expect. She had been hired by one of the most prestigious companies in the industry, an opportunity she had worked tirelessly for, an achievement that had taken years of perseverance and struggle. She had fought her way through countless interviews, demonstrated her worth time and time again, and now here she was, on the cusp of what could be her greatest professional success. But as she approached the elevator, she was greeted by a familiar voice, a voice she had hoped to never hear again. "Mia," the voice said, calm, yet full of an unspoken authority. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned, only to see him standing there. David, the man she had once mocked, the man she had belittled for his humble appearance. Now, he was the one standing before her, looking as powerful as ever, dressed in a sleek, well-tailored suit, exuding an aura of quiet confidence. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe it. The man who had once been just another cheap suit was now the CEO of the very company she had just been hired by. She felt a wave of confusion and dread flood over her. What was this? A cruel joke? Or had fate brought them together again, this time in the most unexpected way possible? "You're the CEO here?" Mia asked, her voice trembling slightly. David gave her a small, knowing smile. "I am." Mia's mind raced. How was this even possible? How had he gone from being a man she had dismissed to the CEO of a company she had worked so hard to be a part of? The conflict in her mind intensified. She had been so focused on proving herself, on climbing the ladder, but now, in front of her, was the very man who had shown her that true success wasn't about appearances or connections. It was about the work, the vision, and the dedication. How could she ever have imagined that David would rise to such heights? It felt like the universe had thrown a cruel curveball, testing her resolve. What was she supposed to do now? Could she work for him? Could she face him, knowing how she had treated him in the past? As she stood there, trying to steady herself, David spoke again, this time with a tone that seemed to carry an unspoken understanding. "I see you've come a long way since that day." His words hung in the air, and Mia's heart sank. It was as if he could read her every thought, every emotion. She couldn't hide from him anymore. "Yes, I've come a long way," Mia replied, trying to regain control of her emotions. "But that doesn't change the fact that I'm here to prove myself." David nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I understand," he said softly. "But don't forget, Mia, it's not always about proving something to others. Sometimes, it's about proving it to yourself." His words struck deep within her. It was as if David was speaking to her soul, reminding her of the lessons she had tried so hard to ignore. For so long, Mia had been driven by the desire to impress, to show the world she was better than she had been perceived. But now, she realized that what David had accomplished wasn't about showing off or flaunting success. It was about building something lasting, something meaningful. As they stood there in the lobby, Mia felt a shift inside her. She had always been so focused on climbing the ladder, on playing the game, that she had missed the most important lesson. It wasn't about the climb. It was about what you did once you got to the top. And now, David had reached the top. But he wasn't there to boast about it. He wasn't there to prove anything to anyone. He was there because he had built something, something that was bigger than just him. He had created an empire. As Mia walked into the office for her first day, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. She was now working for David, the very man who had silently taught her the most valuable lesson she had ever learned. The conflict between them was palpable. Mia couldn't escape the fact that their past interactions had left a deep scar on both of them. But as the day unfolded, Mia found herself grappling with her emotions. She had always thought that success was about competition, about outshining others. But now, as she sat in her new office, surrounded by the luxury and power that David had built, she realized that success was about something much deeper. It was about integrity. It was about passion. It was about creating something that mattered, something that lasted. And now, working for David, Mia was forced to confront her shortcomings. She had spent so much time chasing after a shallow version of success that she had forgotten what true success looked like. David had shown her the way, not through words, but through action. As the days passed, Mia found herself working alongside David, learning from him in ways she had never imagined. She saw his leadership style, calm, composed, and thoughtful. He wasn't the brash, arrogant man she had once thought him to be. He was a man of substance, a man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. And as she worked with him, Mia began to realize that she wasn't just working for him. She was learning from him. The conflict that had once been so fierce between them started to fade away, replaced by a mutual respect that grew stronger with each passing day. Mia's journey had come full circle. She had started out trying to prove herself to everyone around her, including David. But now she realized that the true test was proving herself to herself, finding her purpose, her path, and building something that mattered. As Mia stood at her desk, looking out over the city, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She had come so far, and now, working for David, she realized that this was only the beginning. Mia had been living in the moment, focusing on her work and proving herself in the fast-paced world of business. She'd put in the hours, learned from her mistakes, and was finally starting to make a name for herself in the company. But the past had a way of catching up with her. The one thing Mia had always feared, being exposed, was finally happening. She had lied on her resume. It was a small lie, something she had convinced herself was harmless. She'd exaggerated her experience, claimed to have more skills than she had, all in a desperate attempt to stand out in a highly competitive industry. And now, that lie was coming back to haunt her. It happened on a typical Tuesday morning, one that had started just like any other. She was preparing for an important meeting with a potential client, feeling the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. As she sat at her desk, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from HR, and the subject line made her stomach drop. Urgent, discrepancies found in your resume. Her hands went cold, and her mind raced. How had they found out? She had been so careful, so meticulous in covering her tracks. She thought she had gotten away with it. But now, the truth was out. The email stated that they had conducted a background check and found inconsistencies between her resume and the actual work experience she had. Her heart pounded in her chest as she read the email again, trying to understand how this had happened. Her worst fear had become a reality. She was being caught in a lie. The worst part? David was the one who had personally signed off on her hiring. He had decided to bring her on board, and now she was about to disappoint him in the worst way possible. As she sat there, the weight of her mistakes crashing down on her, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come, and how quickly it could all be taken away. She had worked so hard to prove herself, to escape the mistakes of her past. But this one lie had the power to destroy everything. She tried to calm her racing thoughts, but nothing could stop the feeling of impending doom that washed over her. What was she going to do? The knock on her office door snapped her out of her spiral. "Mia," a voice called from the other side. It was David. She froze, the blood draining from her face. Her worst nightmare had just become real. She opened the door to find him standing there, looking as calm and composed as ever. But there was something in his eyes, a mixture of disappointment and concern, that sent a chill down her spine. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady, but filled with an underlying tension. Mia swallowed hard, trying to keep herself together as she led him into her office. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in around her. "David, she started, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "I know," he said quietly. "I've already seen the report." Mia's heart sank further. She wanted to explain, to tell him how stupid she had been, how desperate she had been to get this job. But no words seemed to come. "Mia," he said, his voice firm. "We both know the importance of honesty in this business. I trusted you, and you betrayed that trust." His words cut deeper than any criticism could. Mia felt the sting of shame, of regret, as she realized just how much she had risked for the sake of a lie. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice shaking. "I just wanted to prove myself. I wanted to make something of myself." David's gaze softened for a moment, but then he spoke again, his voice hardening. "That's not the way to do it, Mia. You can't build a future on lies. It might get you in the door, but it won't keep you there. You've let me down, and worse, you've let yourself down." Mia hung her head, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it was all slipping away. She had been so focused on proving her worth, on climbing the corporate ladder, that she had forgotten the most basic principle: honesty. The conversation that followed felt like a blur. David had offered her the chance to come clean, to admit her mistake and try to salvage what was left of her career. But the damage was done. Mia knew that the trust she had worked so hard to build was shattered. She had to live with the consequences of her actions. David gave her one last chance to redeem herself, but the weight of the situation was crushing. Mia had always prided herself on being a fighter, on being someone who didn't back down. But now, she had to face the reality that her pride had led her to this point. She had let her ambition cloud her judgment, and now she was paying the price. As the day went on, Mia found herself questioning everything. Was this worth it? Was all her hard work, all the sacrifices worth it if it meant losing everything she had built? The conflict within her raged on. She had been so determined to make something of herself, but at what cost? The choices she had made had led her to this rock-bottom moment, and now she had to decide whether she could rise again or let it all slip away. The truth was undeniable. Mia had a long road ahead of her. She would have to rebuild from the ground up, earning back the trust she had lost, not just from David, but from herself. And the only way forward would be to face the truth and own up to her mistakes. Mia was at a crossroads, and her next move would determine whether she could find redemption or lose everything. Mia sat at her desk, her mind still reeling from the confrontation with David earlier. She had made a mistake, one that was likely to cost her more than just her job. Her thoughts were scattered, each one a reminder of how badly things had gone wrong. She couldn't stop replaying the look in David's eyes when he told her he trusted her, and how deeply she had let him down. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it seemed like it was all slipping away. But then, as the day dragged on, something unexpected happened. David walked past her office, his footsteps echoing down the hall. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. He was supposed to be in back-to-back meetings with clients, handling the fallout from the leaked information about her resume. Mia had been preparing herself for the worst, bracing for the moment when he would officially let her go. But instead, he paused in front of her office door. She looked up from her desk, meeting his gaze. For a brief second, their eyes locked. Mia's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the usual cold, businesslike stare she was used to. There was something else. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. David's expression was unreadable. His face was calm, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a flash of something from the past. Mia couldn't believe it. Had he just remembered her? After all these years, after everything that had happened between them, had he finally recognized her? She had never expected him to remember her. It had been a long time since they had last crossed paths. She had been just a small-town girl, struggling to make ends meet when they first met. Back then, he was just starting to build his empire, and she was barely making a living as an intern in a small company. Their paths had crossed once, briefly, before life had taken them in separate directions. It had been years, but Mia still remembered that moment as if it were yesterday. The way he had looked at her, like she was more than just a stranger. It was the first time someone like him had ever paid attention to her. But that was before everything had changed. Now she was here, standing before him, and it felt like nothing had ever been the same. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. She expected him to say something, to acknowledge their past, to confront her about the lies on her resume. But instead, he did nothing. He didn't speak. He didn't even acknowledge the weight of the situation. David simply stood there, his gaze still fixed on her, before he turned and walked away. The silence that followed felt deafening. Mia was left staring after him, confused, conflicted, and unsure of what had just happened. Why had he looked at her like that? Why had he paused? Was there something he was holding back? Or had she imagined it all? Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of the moment. She had expected the worst from him, the cold, businesslike dismissal. But what she got was something far more confusing. A moment of recognition, but no words. No confrontation. No apology. No nothing. As the hours passed, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't just the job, the lies, or even the damage she had done. It was David. There was something he wasn't saying, and it gnawed at her. Was this his way of giving her a chance to fix things? Or was it a silent declaration of finality, a way to tell her that whatever connection they once had was now nothing more than a distant memory? The weight of the unspoken words hung in the air like a cloud. Mia knew that she couldn't let this moment pass without understanding it. She had to find out what was going through David's mind. She had to know whether his silence was a chance for redemption or a sign that all hope was lost. But one thing was certain. This was far from over. Whatever David was feeling, whatever he was holding back, Mia had to face it. She had to find a way to fix what had been broken, even if it meant confronting the truth of their past and the mistakes she had made. The silence between them would not last forever. Mia sat in the small cafe near the office, her fingers absent-mindedly stirring her coffee as her thoughts swirled around her. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the office with David, the recognition in his eyes, the way he had looked at her, the silence. It all haunted her. But beyond that, there was something deeper that troubled her. She had made a mistake, not just with her resume, not just with her career, but with the way she had judged him. Her mind replayed that day when they first met, the first time she had seen David. Back then, he had walked into the room with a suit that looked as if it had been pulled from the back of a thrift store rack. She had laughed. She had mocked him. She had assumed that someone who wore clothes like that couldn't possibly have the power, the wealth, or the ambition to make it in the world. She had looked at him, judged him, and dismissed him. She had judged him by his clothes. And now, she was sitting here, in this quiet cafe, realizing just how wrong she had been. In the past, Mia had always prided herself on her ability to recognize the value in people based on their achievements and status. She had worked so hard to climb the corporate ladder, focusing on the exterior, the superficial things that others valued: wealth, success, appearance. She had always thought that those who had the right clothes, the right car, the right connections were the ones who deserved attention. She had placed herself above those who didn't fit the mold, those who didn't conform to the image of success she had in her mind. But now, in the face of David's quiet demeanor and the growing realization of what he had accomplished, Mia was forced to question everything she had believed. What did her judgment of him say about her? What did it say about how she viewed the world? Was she just another person obsessed with surface-level appearances? Had she been so shallow, so focused on appearances, that she missed the real worth of someone? She had thought that David's cheap suit meant he didn't belong in her world, that he was less than her. But now she understood. It wasn't his clothes that mattered. It was his actions, his ambition, his resilience, and the way he had quietly built an empire. He was a man who had proved that you could be more than what you appeared on the outside. And Mia? What had she done? She had bought into the illusion of success, the one where the clothes made the man, where the price tag determined worth. She had missed the point completely. She had been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder and putting herself in the right circles that she had neglected the very thing that made people truly valuable: their heart, their determination, their character. Mia thought back to the times when she had judged others for their appearance, for the way they carried themselves. She remembered the moments when she had dismissed people based on their social status, assuming that someone's worth could be measured by their bank balance or designer shoes. She had been so blind. Now, sitting here, she couldn't help but wonder what that said about her. What did it mean that she had been so quick to judge? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? Mia knew that she couldn't undo the past. She couldn't change the way she had acted or the things she had said. But she could learn from it. She could choose to be better. She could choose to value people for who they truly were, not just for the clothes they wore or the wealth they had accumulated. As she sat in the cafe, Mia made a silent vow to herself. She would no longer judge people based on appearances. She would stop making assumptions about others before taking the time to understand who they were. She had learned a valuable lesson, and although it had come too late, she was determined to change. The road to redemption wouldn't be easy, and she knew that her past mistakes would continue to haunt her. But she was ready to face them head-on. The first step was understanding herself, understanding the way she had allowed her perceptions to define her actions. The second step was making things right with David, if he would let her. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing. She had to make things right. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of her past judgments. She needed to learn, grow, and evolve. As Mia left the cafe and walked back toward her office, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. She had judged David, but now she was judging herself, and that perhaps was the hardest thing of all. But it was a step in the right direction. She was ready to change. She was ready to make things right. Mia stepped into the office every morning with the weight of her past hanging over her like a storm cloud. The echoes of her earlier mistakes, her pride, and her judgments against David lingered in her mind. She had realized the truth about her superficiality, about her reliance on appearances to gauge worth. She had decided to change, to work her way up without relying on the false comfort of status and wealth. It wasn't going to be easy, though. Mia knew that her actions had consequences, and people weren't quick to forget. Her reputation had been tainted, especially after her public mockery of David. The fact that she had laughed at the man who had quietly built an empire, only to later discover he was the CEO of the company, was something that couldn't be easily undone. But Mia had never been one to back down from a challenge. She had made a choice, and now she was determined to prove herself, not just to her colleagues, but to herself. Day by day, Mia showed up early, stayed late, and immersed herself in the hard work that the job required. She began to distance herself from the people who had only ever cared about surface-level things, and she focused on earning the respect of those who valued dedication, talent, and character. Mia's transformation wasn't just about her work ethic, it was about her attitude. She had learned humility and strength, and she practiced them both daily. Her conversations became more genuine, her interactions more thoughtful. She no longer acted as if she were above others because of her background or her position. Instead, she worked side by side with her colleagues, showing them that she was committed to earning her place through merit, not through shortcuts. She no longer judged others based on their outward appearance or their financial status. Mia took on more difficult projects, pushed through long hours, and made personal sacrifices, all with one goal in mind: to prove that she was more than the woman who had once mocked a man based on his clothes. She wanted to show that she had depth, that she was more than the surface she had once prioritized so highly. Slowly but surely, her efforts started to pay off. Her colleagues began to notice her hard work. Her managers started to trust her more, giving her opportunities to lead and make decisions. Mia's transformation wasn't just visible in her work performance, it was reflected in her interactions with people. She was no longer the woman who had made fun of others for their perceived shortcomings. Instead, she had become someone who understood the value of resilience and effort. But Mia still had one major obstacle: David. The man she had judged so harshly was now her CEO, and she had to face him every day, knowing that her past actions had hurt him. Despite her transformation, she knew she had a long way to go in earning his trust. Mia decided to confront her past head-on. She began by approaching David, knowing full well that it wouldn't be an easy conversation. The first time she spoke to him after all the time that had passed was awkward, but Mia was determined to make things right. She apologized, not just for mocking him, but for the way she had judged him and others based on things that didn't matter. She acknowledged that her attitude had been wrong, and that she was working every day to be a better person. David's reaction wasn't what she had expected. He didn't give her a speech about forgiveness or try to downplay her mistake. Instead, he simply nodded, acknowledging her efforts, but not making excuses for his past behavior either. It was a quiet understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the transformation that had taken place in both of them. Mia wasn't looking for his approval, nor did she expect things to be perfect. What mattered was that she was taking responsibility for her actions. What mattered was that she was putting in the work, day after day, to prove that she had changed. With each passing day, Mia worked tirelessly, not just to rebuild her reputation, but to rebuild herself. It was about more than just earning respect. It was about showing herself that she was worthy of the kind of success that came from hard work, humility, and growth. She had seen firsthand what it was like to judge people on shallow ideals, and now, she was determined to prove that her worth wasn't defined by the clothes she wore or the car she drove. Mia had learned the hard way that success wasn't a reflection of what was on the outside. It was a reflection of the heart and mind that drove it. As the months went by, Mia found that she was no longer the person who had once been so obsessed with status. She had changed, and the people around her saw that change. Her redemption wasn't about grand gestures or public apologies. It was about showing up every single day and proving that she was capable of so much more than the woman who had mocked someone else. Mia had worked tirelessly to rebuild her respect and reputation, and in doing so, she had earned something far more valuable: her own self-respect. It wasn't an easy road, but it was one she had walked willingly, with the full knowledge that her mistakes had led her here, and her growth would take her farther. Mia's heart raced as she walked into the company's headquarters, feeling both pride and anxiety at the same time. She had worked hard to get to this point, putting in countless hours, learning new skills, and proving herself to everyone around her. But there was something Mia hadn't realized. David, the man she had once judged so harshly, had been quietly watching her from the shadows. Though they had barely spoken in the office, he had noticed the incredible effort she had put into her work. He had seen the changes in her, the determination, the resilience. What Mia didn't know was that David had been secretly working behind the scenes to ensure that she got the job of her dreams. He had spoken to the hiring managers, putting in a word for her without her knowledge. It wasn't about getting her a free pass. It was about recognizing her potential and giving her the chance to prove herself on a bigger stage. He knew that she deserved the opportunity, and he wasn't going to let his past feelings about her get in the way of giving her the chance she had worked so hard for. When Mia received the call offering her the position, she was ecstatic. But what she didn't know was that her success wasn't just the result of her hard work. It was the result of David's quiet belief in her, his decision to go the extra mile to ensure she had a shot at her dreams. The first day she walked into her new office, Mia couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had come before. She knew the importance of this moment, how it marked a new chapter in her life, a new beginning, not just for her career, but for her personal growth. What she didn't expect, however, was that David would soon walk into her office, a slight smirk on his face as he casually asked, "How's the new job going, Mia?" She froze, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to admit how much she had been struggling with her imposter syndrome, how she had felt like she didn't truly belong. She didn't want to come off as weak, not after everything she had been through to get to this point. But David seemed to sense her unease. He smiled knowingly and said, "I had a feeling you'd do well. It's why I made sure they noticed you." Mia's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. David had been the one to help her secure the job. He had been the one to give her that extra push when no one else had noticed her potential. Her mind raced as she processed this information. She had never imagined that David, of all people, would secretly be rooting for her. For so long, she had been convinced that he was just a wealthy CEO, someone who could never understand her struggles. But here he was, not only showing his support, but actively ensuring that she had the chance she deserved. It wasn't easy for Mia to accept this. She had worked so hard to prove herself on her own, and now she had to come to terms with the fact that she hadn't done it entirely alone. But instead of feeling defeated, Mia felt a sense of gratitude wash over her. She realized that sometimes success isn't just about personal effort. It's about the people who believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. David hadn't given her the job, but he had allowed her to prove herself, and that made all the difference. Mia's heart swelled with appreciation, but she wasn't going to let this knowledge define her. She had learned too much about humility and hard work to let this moment undermine her efforts. Instead, she vowed to prove to herself, and to everyone around her, that she was capable of earning her place. As Mia sat at her desk, looking out the window with a renewed sense of purpose, she knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. She had a lot of work to do, but she also had a newfound understanding of the power of support and mentorship, even from someone who had once been her rival. And with that realization, Mia was ready to face the challenges ahead, head held high, confident in the knowledge that she could handle whatever came her way. The world around Mia seemed to blur as the truth hit her. The cheap suit, the one she had mocked so relentlessly when they first met, wasn't just some random piece of clothing. It was a symbol, one that carried with it a much deeper meaning than she could have ever imagined. As David stood before her, his expression unreadable, he slowly began to speak, his voice heavy with emotion. "That suit," he began, his voice quiet but steady, "was my father's dying gift to me." Mia felt her heart stop as the weight of his words sank in. She had spent so much time ridiculing him for something so trivial, unaware of the immense significance that the suit held for David. It wasn't just a garment. It was the last thing his father had given him before passing away, a symbol of love, strength, and the legacy that his father had left behind. David's father, a self-made man who had come from nothing, had raised him with values that transcended material wealth. The suit, simple as it was, represented everything his father had worked for: a life of integrity, sacrifice, and pride. Mia's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized the depth of her mistake. Her earlier judgment had been based solely on appearances, on the superficial notion that his worth could be determined by his clothing. She had never stopped to consider the story behind it, the meaning that it held for him. As David shared more about his father's last days, Mia began to understand the full weight of his loss. His father had instilled in him a sense of purpose and humility, teaching him that true value lies not in outward appearances, but in character, in one's actions, and the impact they have on others. That suit was a reminder of his father's love and the values he had passed down. In that moment, Mia saw David in an entirely new light. He wasn't just the CEO she had once resented. He was a man who had known heartache, loss, and sacrifice. And yet, through it all, he had remained grounded, committed to carrying his father's legacy forward. Mia felt a rush of guilt flood over her, realizing how much she had underestimated him. She had mocked him, belittled him, without ever understanding the struggles that had shaped him into the person he was today. David, however, seemed to understand her discomfort. His eyes softened as he saw the genuine remorse on her face. "It's all right," he said quietly, his voice warm but distant. "I never expected you to know. I didn't want you to. Not like this." Mia nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her past actions. She had been so focused on her world, her expectations, that she had failed to see the humanity in him. In that moment, Mia realized the importance of looking beyond the surface, of understanding the story behind the person before making judgments. The suit, once a symbol of ridicule in her eyes, now held a deeper meaning. It was no longer a symbol of a cheap man, but of a man who had overcome adversity, carried the weight of loss, and persevered with dignity. David's words echoed in her mind as she left his office that day. She knew she had a long way to go to make amends, to truly understand the kind of person he was. But one thing was certain. Her perspective had shifted. The cheap suit had been the catalyst for this change, revealing the layers beneath David's carefully constructed persona. Mia now knew that what truly mattered wasn't the label on his clothes, but the person he was inside. A person who deserved respect, understanding, and most importantly, the chance to be seen for who he truly was. As Mia sat across from David, her heart racing, a sense of unease washed over her. She could feel the weight of his gaze, his eyes fixed on her, as if he were studying her every move, every word. The atmosphere in the room felt thick with tension, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, Mia questioned everything. Everything she thought she knew about David. He had been distant, even cold at times, and the deeper they got into their relationship, the more she felt like there was something he wasn't telling her. Something important. It wasn't until that fateful night, when the truth finally came out, that everything fell into place. David leaned forward, his expression unreadable, his voice low and steady. "I've been watching you, Mia," he began, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "From the moment we met, I've been testing your character." Mia blinked, her mind racing as she tried to process what he had just said. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. I never wanted to make things easy for you, David continued. I knew you were ambitious, determined to climb the social ladder. But I wanted to see if your heart was in the right place. I needed to know if you would be willing to stand by me when everything we had, was taken away. The words hit Mia like a slap. All this time she had believed that David's distance, his strange behavior, was due to his feelings for her. She had convinced herself that he didn't truly care for her, that he saw her as nothing more than a tool to help him achieve his goals. But now, it became painfully clear that he had been testing her all along, watching her closely, analyzing her every move, to see if she would stay true to herself, or if she would abandon her values for the sake of money and status. Mia's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. David had created obstacles for her, placed challenges in her path to see how she would react, and tested her integrity and her loyalty. The job offer, the opportunities, the moments when he had pulled back, the times when she had been forced to prove herself, they had all been part of the test. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much he had been watching her, not only to see what she could do for him, but to see if she would still care for him when all the luxury, the power, and the fame were stripped away. It had been a game, a carefully orchestrated series of moves, and Mia had been unknowingly playing her part all along. You're telling me, Mia whispered, her voice shaking, that everything was a test? David nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Yes, he said simply. But I never expected you to pass it with flying colors. I never thought you would stay with me when I took everything away, when I was no longer the man you thought I was. Mia felt a lump form in her throat as she struggled to comprehend the depth of what he was saying. All this time, she had questioned his intentions, doubted his love, and been unsure of what he truly wanted from her. But now, it seemed like it had all been part of some larger plan, one that was designed to test not just her character, but her ability to love unconditionally. David had watched as she fought for what she believed in, as she clawed her way up, all the while wondering if she would ever get the chance to stand beside him as an equal. He had seen her vulnerability and her fears, and had purposely kept her on edge, never fully revealing his true intentions. I didn't want you to be with me because of my wealth, Mia. David continued, his voice softening, the hardness in his eyes melting away. I wanted you to be with me because you saw me for who I truly am. Not the man in the suit, not the CEO, but the man who needed someone to believe in him when everything else fell apart. The weight of his words settled on Mia's heart, and she realized just how deeply David had been affected by everything they had been through. It wasn't about the money, the job, or the status. It was about finding someone who could love him for who he truly was. The mask he had worn and the challenges he had thrown in her way had all been part of his way of seeing if she would stand by him when the world around them crumbled. And now, with the grand reveal, Mia understood that the test had never been about her success or failure. It had been about love, trust, and the willingness to stand by each other when everything else was gone. As the silence lingered in the room, Mia could feel her heart shift. Everything she thought she knew about their relationship, everything she thought she understood about David, had changed in that moment. And for the first time she realized that love was never about the things you could gain, the money, or the status. It was about the connection, the trust, and the willingness to stand by someone when the world doesn't give you anything else to stand on. I never knew, Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. David smiled softly, the corners of his lips lifting ever so slightly. I never expected you to, he said, but I always hoped you would. In that moment, Mia realized that she had passed the test, not because she had done everything right, but because she had been willing to love him, even when the world had tried to tear them apart. And for the first time, she knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. As Mia stood in front of David, her heart racing, she couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. The memories of their first meeting flooded her mind. The judgment, the mockery, the way she had turned her back on him because of his humble appearance. He had been nothing more than a man in a cheap suit to her, someone she had dismissed without knowing his true worth. But now, in this moment, everything had changed. David had shown her who he was, not just the successful CEO or the wealthy man, but a man who had been through so much, a man who had quietly endured her scorn and still chosen to be with her, despite all the odds. They had been through hardships together, each facing their battles, but through it all, David had never wavered in his love for her. As she looked at him now, standing tall and proud in his suit, the same one she had once mocked, Mia felt a deep sense of regret for how she had judged him. She had seen the surface, the outer layers, but she hadn't seen the heart beneath. She hadn't seen the strength, the resilience, the love he had for her. David had been there, quietly watching her, waiting for her to realize that the true measure of a person wasn't found in the clothes they wore or the status they held, but in the heart and soul that guided their actions. "I would choose you, David," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "Even in that same suit." David's eyes softened, the corners of his mouth curling into a small, tender smile. He had known all along that this moment would come, that she would realize what mattered most, that she would see beyond the surface and understand that his love for her was never about appearances, but about the connection they shared. "I know," he said quietly, taking a step closer to her. "I always knew you'd choose me for who I am, not what I wear." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that Mia felt deep in her chest. All the doubt, all the uncertainty, had melted away in that moment. It didn't matter that he wasn't the man she had once imagined him to be. It didn't matter that he didn't fit into the glamorous world she had once dreamed of. What mattered was that they had found each other, that despite all the twists and turns, all the misunderstandings and mistakes, they had chosen to be together. The suit, the wealth, the status, it was all secondary. In this moment, it was just them. Just their love. David reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb tracing the outline of her jaw. "I'll choose you too," he whispered. "No matter what, no matter where we go from here, I'll always choose you." And as the weight of his words settled in, Mia realized that they had finally reached the place she'd always wanted to be. The place where love wasn't about the things you had, but about the person you were willing to stand beside through thick and thin. No more judgments, no more doubts, just the simple, undeniable truth that they were meant to be together. "I choose you, David," Mia said, her voice strong now, her heart full. "Always." As the two of them stood there, lost in the moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. It was just them, and their love, stronger than any suit, stronger than any judgment, and stronger than anything the world could throw their way. And with that, they knew they were ready to face whatever the future held, together. As the story nears its end, Mia and David stand hand in hand, their journey of growth and understanding culminating in this one powerful moment. The chaos of their past, the misunderstandings, and the judgments have all faded away, leaving only the undeniable bond that they share. Mia looks up at David, her eyes filled with admiration, realizing how far she's come, not just in her career, but in her own understanding of love and what truly matters. She had once been blinded by appearances, believing that success and wealth were the measures of a person's worth. But now, standing beside David, she understands the truth. It's the heart, the kindness, and the integrity that define a person, not their clothes or the size of their bank account. David, too, has changed. He has learned that love isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about accepting each other for who they truly are, flaws and all. "Would you judge love by appearance or by character?" Mia asks softly, her voice filled with emotion. The question hangs in the air, a challenge to everyone who has ever let surface-level judgments shape their view of another person. David squeezes her hand gently, his smile warm and understanding. "I've learned," he says quietly, "that love isn't about the outward image. It's about the soul, the connection that you can't always see, but you can always feel. As they share a final look, a sense of peace settles over them. The future, though uncertain, feels promising. No matter the obstacles, no matter the judgments of others, they have found what truly matters. The story of Mia and David is a reminder to all that love isn't something that can be measured by appearances or material wealth. It's something that comes from the heart, built on trust, respect, and understanding. The screen slowly fades to black as the question lingers, echoing in the hearts of those who have followed their journey. Would you judge love by appearance or by character?